I'm too old for this, she whispered. But the young cowboy stayed the night and the next. The wind came first, combing the wheat into long, uneasy braids. Then the hoofbeats, distant, wrong the way thunder can be wrong when it skates too. Close to the house, Mae Delaney blew out the lantern on her porch and pressed a palm to the door frame to feel the tremor travel through the wood. Night made the valley into one black bowl, and every sound seemed to pour toward her ranch. She had been alone 4 years, long enough to learn that fear had a schedule. Coyotes after moonrise, drunken men on paydays, spring floods that came after the first warm rain. This sound, swift, light, and wavering, didn't match any of those. She reached for the Spencer rifle above the door and felt the old ache in her shoulder wake like a dog. A horse broke from the dark, stumbled and stopped in a spray of gravel. The rider slid to the ground, gripping the saddle horn with one hand and the right side of his shirt with the other. He was young, too young to have that careful way of moving, the kind that comes from pain and practice. He looked up, and the porch light she'd just snuffed still held him in its memory. "Don't shoot," he said, breath fogging. "Name's Jesse Hart." His voice was clean as creek water. His hat was too big for him, or maybe his face wasn't done growing into it. Blood seeped between his fingers and slicked his belt. "Please, they're behind me." Mae let the rifle's barrel dip a fraction. "Stables there," she said, nodding toward the dark smear of the outbuilding. "You make it that far, I'll not shoot. You make a mess on my boards, I'll think on it." She heard her own voice and recognized the flinty humor of a woman who's been alone too long. He staggered, and she caught his elbow, surprised by heat, surprised by how light he was. In the kitchen, she set him in a chair and cut his shirt. The wound was a groove, not a hole. A bullet had skimmed his ribs and carried part of him away. She cleaned it with boiled water and spirits that smelled like apples and fire. He hissed, but didn't move. The clock ticked. Outside, a far laugh lifted, then faded, like something that had no business being that happy this late. "Who is they?" Mae asked, binding him with a torn pillowcase. "Men who don't like to be told no," Jesse said. "Luther Pike and his boys." The name was a nail hitting the plank of her. Past Mae heard again the last argument in town. The winter her husband died, the sheriff saying he'd watch Pike and mark his trail, and then doing nothing at all. She tied the knot and met Jesse's eyes, a steady blue that wasn't asking for comfort and didn't offer it either. "You picked a bad place to run," she said. "Pike knows this valley like a dog knows his chain." Jesse smiled, small and sideways. "So do you, I reckon." They listened. Wind, wheat rubbing itself to sleep. Then the soft scrape of leather. A horse shifting its weight out by the cottonwoods. Mae blew the kitchen lamp low, and in the little light left the young cowboy's cheekbones looked carved by shadows and wanting. "I'm too old for this," she whispered. More prayer than complaint. The front gate squealed, a man whistled, 3 notes lazy as a cat. Mae cocked the Spencer. Jesse reached for his revolver and found it empty. Outside, boots rang on her porch like new coins. "Evening, Miss Delaney," called a voice that sounded like a grin worn too long. "Got business with a boy wandered off with something that ain't his." Mae eased the latch with 2 fingers and didn't open the door. "Ranch is closed," she said. "Try again come daylight." Laughter spooled out over the porch boards, then the scrape of a match and the egg yolk glow of a cigar. Jesse touched his bandage like he needed to check it was real. "I can ride," he murmured. "Won't bring them on you. You ride, you bleed out before the creek," Mae said without turning. "Sit quiet." She let the silence thicken until even the breeze stopped talking. "You boys light one spark on my place," she said to the door. "Clear and even. And you'll spend the rest of your mean days smelling burnt hair, yours." Pike's laugh, slow and admiring. "Still got that honey vinegar in you, do you?" Jesse frowned. Mae exhaled through her nose. "He's tried buying this ranch 3 times. He thinks everything he can't have is worth stealing. Tonight," Jesse said, "he's after a ledger." Mae turned. "What ledger?" Jesse looked down. His jaw worked. "Worked with Pike a spell," he said, the words reluctant, honest. "Scouted trails. Not proud. Your husband, God rest him, kept books for folks he helped when blight took their cattle. Notes, names, dates. Your man was decent, but decent men write things down. Pike don't like paper that remembers." Mae's throat tightened. Harlan Delaney had counted debts and forgiven most of them. The arithmetic of fairness had been his religion. She had packed his papers into a tea chest the week after he died, not ready to touch the ghost of his handwriting. "I ain't opened that chest in years," she said. "They'll burn your house to ash to make sure," Jesse said. He stood, testing his ribs. A shadow flickered as one of Pike's boys walked past the kitchen window. Close enough to hear if a fork was set down too hard. They'll play nice till they don't. Mae looked at the young man, blood seeping. Shoulders squared against a history he wasn't hiding from. "How old are you?" she asked, a question meant to stop time for a second. 23, he said. "Old enough to be sick of running?" She signed the cross her mother taught her and made a choice that felt like stepping through a door and locking it behind her. "You stay," she said. "You do exactly as I tell you." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Yes, ma'am." Outside, Pike's voice softened. "Miss Delaney, last offer. Send out the boy and the book, and we'll tip our hats and leave your flowers untrampled." Mae stepped to the window, parted the curtain with the barrel of the Spencer, and took inventory, 3 horses close. Likely 3 more out past the cottonwoods. A mule. A wagon too far back to be neighborly. Men who had carried fires, from one county to the next until the map smelled like smoke. She let the curtain fall. "My husband taught me a thing or two about men who want what don't belong to them," she said through the door. "That why you're a widow, ma'am?" Pike asked, not unkind, and Jesse's jaw hardened. Mae didn't answer. She turned to Jesse. "Cellar," she said. "Now," he hesitated. "It ain't hiding," she said, reading his pride. "It's where the ledger is, and where we find a way to keep it from making corpses out of honest names." They pulled up the trapdoor. Cool air lifted. Earth smell. Jesse lowered himself down, teeth tight as wire. Mae followed, closing the door above them, leaving the house to the old music of wind and wood. In the cellar, the tea chest sat under shelves of peaches and a sack of seed mending itself toward spring. Mae knelt, lifted the lid, and there it was, Harlan's careful spine of bound paper, twine still tied. She laid a hand on it, the way you check that someone sleeping is still here. Jesse looked away, giving her that small privacy. "My leaving Pike started with that book," he said quietly. "We made a ride. A girl at a line camp brought water. Pike asked her daddy for the deed to his water rights. Daddy said no. Next night, Pike came back with mistakes in his heart. I stood there and did nothing." His voice grated like boot leather. "I want to do something now." Above them, a boot heel kicked the trap door. Dust sifted down like a soft warning. "You ready to do something that might get you killed?" Mae asked. "Yes, ma'am," Jesse said, and didn't blink. They returned to the kitchen, bold and quiet. The ledger wrapped in oilcloth and stowed in Jesse's saddlebag by the back door. Mae struck a match and lit one lamp low, just bright enough to make shadows argue. Jesse's gaze ticked to the window. "Pike's left a watcher by your well," he whispered. "They'll wait you out." "We won't be here to be waited," Mae said. She fetched a tin of nails, a coil of wire, and a spool of twine from a drawer that had fed 1,000 repairs. "You fix fences long enough. You learn how to break a man's hurry." They moved together without clumsiness, as if they'd been practicing in dreams. Jesse rigged a trip line across the back stoop low as snake grass while Mae slipped out front and loosened the hinge pins of the gate, just enough to turn it treacherous. They worked by the grammar of whisper and glance. At the stable, Mae's mare Sugarfoot rolled an eye that reflected the moon like a silver coin. Jesse steadied himself on a stool post, white with pain but steady as a fence cedar. "We'll slip out the North Arroyo," he said. "There's a dry shelf under the creek bank. Hide the book there." Mae nodded. "And then we light a little truth," Jesse said, and touched the brim of his hat. They moved through the yard like they were stepping across sleeping dogs. By the well, a man spit. The sound was close as breath. Jesse handed Mae his revolver. 2 rounds left. "Keep for last resort." She looked at the iron, its weight and promise. Once she said, "I figured I was made for home and table and prayer. Turns out I'm made for standing and saying no." Jesse's mouth did that quiet smile again. "Home takes both." A shape rose by the well. "Evening, Miss Delaney," the shape said, and the world tried to shrink. Mae tipped her chin and walked past like she owned all the darkness she needed. The well guard grinned, glanced at her empty hands, and never saw Jesse's until Jesse's forearm snapped across his throat, gentle and firm. They lowered the man to the grass and tied him with the same care Mae used to truss roasts. In the arroyo, the earth smelled like old rain. Mae dug with a short-handled spade, every scoop a small vow, Jesse keeping watch with the posture of a man who has been the hunter and is cured of liking it. She set the ledger in the ground like seed, covered it, pressed the earth flat, then scattered dry leaves over the spot so it could forget itself a while. Back at the house, lanterns winked near the road, more riders. Pike brought a wagon, Jesse said. He aims to load your life. Mae breathed once, twice, steady as knitting. Then we burn what he won't have, she said, and Jesse's eyes flicked to hers, startled and admiring. They sloshed. Lamp oil along the old winter woodpile stacked. Against the fence Pike would likely push through. First Jesse set a fuse line of straw and twine like a schoolteacher writing a stern sentence across the yard. Mae fetched her late husband's brass bell from the porch, the one he'd rung when storms came mean. She rang it now, and its note lifted with a grave clarity. Neighbors will hear, Jesse said. Some will come, Mae answered. Some will listen from their windows and judge. But they'll all know. Pike, back at the gate, called, Miss Delaney, I'm tired. Let's end this without drama. Mae struck the match, blew a breath over it, as if she were sending a message to someone she loved, and touched it to the straw. Fire took like agreement. The fence flamed into a warning line. Not a wall. Pike's horse reared, the wagon balked, and his men swore, then fell into the dance of figuring out what to do. Jesse and Mae used the confusion to slip along the house edge to the stable. Take Sugarfoot, Mae told him. You ride to the marshal's camp by Split Rock. They moved an office down from Santa Fe last month. Tell them Pike is collecting debts from people who don't owe him. Bring the law. Jesse shook his head. I'm not leaving you. You want to do something true? Mae said, laying a hand on his forearm. Believe I can stand, he swallowed. I do. But, he looked at the flame line thinning under shovels. A spare shot cracked from the yard. Mae flinched, grabbed Jesse's sleeve, and pulled him behind the stable door just as wood splintered near the hinge. The second shot yanked a grunt out of Jesse's chest, and he sagged to one knee. Jesse? He blinked hard, teeth bared, hand pressed to the fresh red on his bandage where the edge had been opened. Just a graze. He lied in a voice that didn't convince his own lungs. Mae dragged him deeper into the stall, shadows, and tore her apron into strips to press. Against the bleed, stay with me, she said, and her voice had the tone of a woman who could order rain. Boots pounded the stable's far side. Mae shoved Jesse's revolver back into his hand and took up a pitchfork. The door banged. A man in a duster pushed through, eyes narrow, gun in his fist and his heart already making excuses. Mae stepped into the line of the gun and drove the pitchfork into the dirt at his feet hard enough to spit clods. He startled. Just a flinch. But it was all the time Jesse needed. The young cowboy shot the man's hat off clean and shouted, back, in a tone that promised to widen the hole if needed. The man stumbled out cursing and ran for the others. Jesse's breath hitch-sawed. Go, Mae said. Split Rock. Bring law or bring dawn with you. He took her hand and squeezed it as if the strength could travel skin to skin. I'll come back, he said. Raw and certain. I didn't ask you to, she lied. He swung into Sugarfoot's saddle like a man who's never been anything but alive. Hoofbeats lifted, found the hardpan and fled north under a sky gone black at the edges. Mae turned back to the yard. Pike stood beyond the flame line. Cool as a banker. Duster collar turned up. Cigar ember a red eye. Pretty, Miss Delaney, he called. But nothing stays beautiful when it burns too long. She raised the Spencer to reply when a small, traitorous flicker rose 3 doors down. The Widow Jensen's porch lamp flashing twice, then again, a pattern Mae had seen before at barn dances, when a nervous girl signaled her friend. Only it wasn't that. It was Hargreave, her neighbor, his window blinking a code toward Pike the way cowards do when they confuse safety with favor. A betrayal she could see. Something in Mae straightened beyond bone. She stepped off the porch, into her own yard, into her own decision. Dawn threatened but held, the sky a cold iron about to be hammered. Pike moved his men to the south fence where the fire had chewed itself lean. They came in pairs, guns low, bodies ducking as if bending would make them right. Mae eased along the shadow of the sod shed, her boots remembering each divot, her heart knocked, yes, but in an ordered rhythm, steady as post holes. She had placed a bucket inside the shed doorway the night Harlan died, a habit of grief that had turned into a small superstition. Now she moved it aside, found the coil of rope beneath, and smiled because the world sometimes offered back what you forgot you'd saved. Pike's first 2 men climbed the fence, and the fence decided to become cowardly beneath them. Mae's loosened pins finally. Falling, the top plank teetered. The men pitched forward together in a tangle of curse and dust. She yanked the rope taut where she'd laced it through sagebrush and hitchpost, and the second pair went down too, mouths full of the front yard they'd hoped to own by supper time. Pike stepped through fire-limp ash and studied her with something almost like respect. He lifted both hands, palms empty, and smiled like a man who has more than one kind of weapon. "Miss Delaney," he said gently, "you can't stop mourning. Best you hand me what I want and let the day be kind." Mae raised the Spencer to shoulder and found him in the sights. "Kindness that asks for a price it didn't earn isn't kindness," she said. He shrugged, let his hands drop and nodded to the wagon. The canvas peeled back and Mae's breath went thin. 2 men stood up inside, each holding a torch long as a man. Soaked heads dripping pitch, behind them, stacked neat and legal, were barrels stamped with the seal of a trading company she knew to be fond of profit and careless with conscience. Pitch fire. Even the damp morning would bow to that. Pike tipped his chin. Tlastask. Mae thought of the ledger under the earth like a heart waiting for a chest to grow around it. She reached behind her, felt for the brass bell, and rang it once. Hard. The sound rolled down the valley as if it remembered the path to every kitchen. A shot sounded from Hargreaves' porch, not at Pike, but into the air. The way a man shoots when he wants to seem brave without endangering anything he might still need. Neighbors always were a mixed blessing, Pike said. Till amused, the torchmen lit their brands. Hoofbeats answered the bell. From the north, Jesse's mare flew like a pulled thread, and behind him came 2 mounted marshals in hats that didn't lie, and a wagon whose sides flashed with a star. Jesse had the reins in one hand and a scrap of his life in the other, and a grin of pure relief that even pain couldn't edit. Luther Pike, a marshal's voice cracked the morning. By order of the United States, you know the rest. Pike did, because he laughed and tossed his cigar into the ash and gestured with his chin. The torchmen hurled their brands high, arcing toward Mae's porch. Jesse spurred, rose in the stirrups, and reckless, beautiful, stood tall enough to catch one mid-air. It slammed his forearm and rolled into the dirt, striking sparks that died like lies exposed to daylight. The second brand smacked the porch roof and clung like a tick. Mae ran into the heat. She did not think. She ran. She ripped the water barrel's plug, took the force of the pour full on her chest, and lifted the bucket into it until her shoulders screamed. She heaved and the torch hissed out, leaving a charred hole rimmed in steam. Gunfire elsewheres, the marshals trading punctuation with Pike's men. Jesse cut a torchbearer's path off by yanking a clothesline taut between 2 posts, the man flipping backward in a flail of anger and surprise. The marshal's wagon skidded to a stop, and a deputy, young, freckled, hopped down and leveled a short shotgun with the merciless calm of a baker cutting dough. Pike drew at last, a patient snake. He fired, and a marshal's hat died a heroic death. Mae swung the Spencer the way she would swing a barn door against a storm, and put a bullet into the axle of Pike's wagon. It blew a splintered sigh and collapsed, tossing barrels that cracked and oozed pitch, like a truth that couldn't keep itself together. Jesse slid from Sugarfoot, landed with a groan that almost took his knees, and kept moving. He came up behind Pike the way night comes up behind lamps. "Turn around," he said, voice low and spent. "It's morning," Pike did, slow as a man remembering manners. He looked at Jesse with genuine curiosity. "Boy, I hoped you'd keep riding." "I did," Jesse said. "Here." He knocked the gun from Pike's hand with a neat flick that somebody once taught him out of meanness, and Jesse had stolen for mercy. The freckled deputy was there in the next breath. Irons announced with a bright clink. Pike's men, seeing the day's direction, lost interest in dying for someone who wouldn't spell their names right. The yard filled with a quiet that smelled like wet ashes and mule sweat. Mae's arms shook with the remainder of everything. She lowered the Spencer and finally let herself sit on the top step, palms open on her knees as if to show anyone watching that she held no weapon but her breath. Jesse walked to her, staggered once, recovered, and sat beside her, close but not touching, both of them watching the marshals set their particular order upon the morning. "You all right?" he asked. "I am," she said, surprised to find it true. She looked at his forearm, angry red where the torch had kissed him, bandaged darker where the earlier bullet had reopened its argument. "You're bleeding on my porch," she said, and he laughed with the exhausted sweetness of someone who just remembered laughter. The marshals took Pike and 3 of his loyalists. They took statements that smelled like dust and truth. They took one long look at Hargreaves' blinking window and put his name in a little book he would not see until it mattered. By noon, the valley sounded like itself again, bees, a thin saw, an argument between 2 crows that nobody intended to settle. Mae patched the porch roof with shingles she'd meant to use. On the chicken shed, Jesse held nails and tried to be useful without getting in the way of a woman in her element. He moved careful, his bandage new clean, his smile absent until she climbed down and decided to award him a sip of coffee like a medal. He stood with the cup and looked at her fence and said, "You mind if I help set those pins back? You mind doing it right?" she asked, and his grin widened. They worked into afternoon. The ledger slept under the creek bank, and Mae felt its presence the way you feel a child dozing in the next room, comforted by the weight of it. Careful because it's delicate. They spoke little. They didn't need to. He asked for twine, for pliers, for water, and she handed each with the grace of understanding. After the last hinge pin slid home like it had always meant to, they sat again on the porch step. The sky turned the color of pewter, thinking about silver. Mae rubbed the heel of her hand across her brow and took inventory of the day. One porch saved, one way of life postponed from ending, one young man still breathing who might not have been. "You could have kept riding," she said. Jesse tipped his head, eyes on the wheat, now standing up again as if it had forgiven the night. "I did something wrong once," he said, "several times if we're counting. A man's got to do more than leave." "You did," Mae said. She looked at his face and saw the boy who would always look younger than his sorrow, and the man he was busy making out of it. "I'm too old for this," she whispered again. But this time there was something warm threaded through it. He turned his head, curious. "For what?" "Starting," she said softly. "And hoping, and thinking I can still be surprised in ways that don't end with funerals." Jesse studied his boots, the boards, her hands. "I'm not dumb enough to ask you to be 20 again," he said. "I'm just asking if you'd let me fix fences here a while. Learn how to want the same sunrise twice." It wasn't a declaration. It was a pledge framed in twine and cedar and sweat. A meadowlark tried out a phrase and seemed pleased with it. Mae set her coffee down and threaded her fingers together like she was about to pray and couldn't remember the words. "You can sleep in the bunkhouse," she said at last, voice steady. "It leaks when the wind comes west. You can start with the roof." He nodded, accepting terms with a relief that pressed his shoulders low. "I'll stay the night," he said, then smiled because it sounded smaller than the truth of it. "I'll stay," he corrected, the young part of him bright, and the older part, the part earned today, calm as dusk. At sun's last line, they walked the fence together, counting posts, writing two that leaned like tired men. Mae showed him the place where Harlan had wanted to plant apple trees once he convinced the soil it was loved. Jesse knelt and pressed his palm flat to the ground, as if taking a promise from it. "Tomorrow," he said. They ate stew at the kitchen table that had heard laughter and silence and 1,000 small agreements. Jesse's left sleeve was rolled to keep the burn clean, and the sight of his forearm nicked, banded, and out of excuses, made Mae feel protective in a way that held no shame. She told him where the broom was, and he swept without comment. When she reached to take the pan, their hands touched, and a quiet passed between them that didn't rush to name itself. Mae blew out the lamp and the house remembered how to hold 2 breaths again. Out in the bunkhouse, a match scratched, a blanket rustled. Mae stood at the door and looked over the yard. Fence straight, well-guard snoring where they'd left him for the marshals to collect. Stars curious and unjudging. Home, she thought, and then amended, becoming home. Morning came with a thin, courageous light. They dug 2 holes by the fence and planted the first apple saplings Mae had ever let herself buy. Jesse tamped the earth with the heel of his hand like he was fastening. A promise to the planet. Mae watered them from the bucket that had saved her roof. Blood to truth, she said, surprising herself. Truth to growth, he answered. Surprising her more, and growth to home, they said together without planning to. Hand laughed, because saying it made it larger and nearer. Neighbors came by, some awkward with pies they didn't know how to give. Some with news and a keen eye for gossip. Hargreave rode past and did not stop. The marshal's wagon rolled by, too slow with the weight of men whose futures had unclenched from the world. Jesse tipped his hat to them. Mae lifted a palm. At dusk she stood again on the porch. The bunkhouse lamp glowed warm and square. Jesse was nothing but a silhouette near the saplings. A long, quiet shape, hat in his hands, head bowed as if listening to something only he could hear, the kind of prayer a man says to stay decent. He looked up, found her. Hand lifted a hand. She nodded once and felt the exact weight of her years and the newness of the day both sit inside her without arguing. "I'm too old for this," she said one last time. But it ended in a smile that didn't apologize for anything. The wind came through the wheat with a patient hand. The house breathed. The night settled, not as a threat but as a quilt, and the young cowboy stayed. Courage keeps harm at the gate, but truth keeps it from circling back. Some debts are paid by standing your ground. The rest are paid by planting something that will outlive your fear. When blood gives way to truth, growth can happen. When growth is tended, home arrives. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen to watch another unforgettable Western tale where destiny and courage collide. Don't forget to subscribe.